She never planned to fall in love with a girl who hated books. In a small university town in upstate New York, where winter snow fell so thick it felt like the whole world was wrapped in a soft blanket, Sophie worked in a tiny independent bookstore called Dusty Pages. It was her sanctuary. The smell of old paper, the crackle of the fireplace in the corner, the quiet footsteps of visitors who came not so much to buy as to simply breathe. Sophie wore oversized sweaters, tied her hair in a messy bun, and knew exactly where every book stood. Her life was calm, predictable, and completely lonely, though she wouldn't admit it to herself. Then Ellie walked in. It happened on one of those evenings when a blizzard raged outside, and the shop was nearly empty. The door chimed, letting in a swirl of cold air, and in the doorway stood a girl in a black leather jacket, dark hair wet with snow, with a look that said she'd just lost an argument with the entire world. She shook the snow off her boots, scanned the shelves with open disdain, and announced loudly to the cashier, "Do you have anything here that won't put me to sleep in 5 minutes?" Sophie, who was shelving new arrivals at that moment, looked up and truly saw her for the first time. Ellie was tall, with sharp cheekbones and a habit of biting her lower lip when she was angry. And she was angry often. "Depends what you're looking for," Sophie replied calmly, though her heart suddenly beat a little louder. "Nothing. I hate books. I only came because my friend said, 'Ellie, you're too cynical. Go to a normal place for once.' So here I am. Happy." Sophie smiled, not out of politeness, but because for the first time in ages she felt genuinely curious. "You can sit by the fireplace. It's warm. And there's wine if you want. Homemade. From the owner." Ellie looked at her like Sophie had just suggested jumping off a bridge. "You seriously sell wine in a bookstore?" "Only after 8. And only to people who look like they really need it." Ellie snorted, but took off her jacket and walked to the sofa by the fire. Sophie brought 2 glasses and a bottle of red the owner kept for special occasions. They sat in silence. Snow tapped against the windows. The fire crackled. Ellie swirled her glass and suddenly said, "I'm a photographer. And books, they lie. They simplify everything. Life isn't like novels. Nobody falls in love at first sight. Nobody changes because of one conversation. It's all bullshit." Sophie looked at her for a long time. "Have you ever tried reading the ones that are honest? Where everything really is bullshit, but still beautiful?" Ellie raised an eyebrow. "Show me." Sophie stood, walked between the shelves, and returned with a slim paperback. "Carol by Patricia Highsmith. Here. Nobody saves anyone. Just 2 women who met at the wrong time. And still couldn't walk away." Ellie took the book, opened to a random page, read a few lines, and closed it. "I'll be back tomorrow. We'll see if you're right." She left, forgetting her jacket on the back of the sofa. Sophie sat until closing, staring at that jacket, as if it could tell her whether its owner would return. She did. At first, once a week. Then more often. She'd come after shoots, tired, cheeks red from the cold, sit on the same sofa, pick up the book Sophie had left specially for her and read. Sometimes aloud. Sometimes in silence. Sometimes arguing. "Therese is too weak," she'd say. "And Carol is too proud," Sophie would answer. They drank wine, watched the fire die down, talked about everything, how Ellie grew up in a family where her dad left when she was 7 and she never trusted anyone again, how in high school Sophie kissed her best friend at a party, and the next day the friend pretended nothing happened, and they never spoke again. One day Ellie came with her camera. "Sit," she said. "I want to shoot you among the books." Sophie laughed. "I photograph terribly. Shut up and sit." She shot. A lot. Sophie with a glass in hand. Sophie reading aloud. Sophie looking out the window, unaware she was being photographed. Then Ellie showed her the pictures. On one, Sophie sat curled up on the sofa, arms around her knees, firelight falling across her face, and in her eyes was something completely bare. "That's not me," Sophie whispered. "That's you. You just never saw yourself that way." Winter was ending. The snow was melting. Ellie started coming every evening. They closed the shop together, turned off the lights, left only the candles. The owner allowed it for the atmosphere. They sat on the floor among the books, drank wine from the same glass because the second one had disappeared somewhere. One evening, Ellie said, "I'm leaving. For Los Angeles. A 1-year contract. Big project." Sophie froze. "When?" "In a week." The silence was so thick you could hear wax dripping from the candles. "And?" Sophie asked quietly. Ellie looked at her for a long time, then stood, walked to the window, pressed her forehead against the cold glass.
"I'm scared, Sophie."
"I'm scared that if I stay, I'll ruin you. You're like your books."
Pure. Real. And
"I break everything." Sophie stood, walked over, stood behind her and wrapped her arms around her, just like in the photo she would later print and hang above the bed, one woman hugging the other from behind, chin on her shoulder, both looking at the same point. "You're not ruining anything," she whispered. "You're just letting me be myself for the first time." Ellie turned. Their faces were so close their breaths mingled. "I don't know how," Ellie whispered. "I don't know how to love without running away." "Then don't run. At least not tonight." Ellie closed her eyes, then opened them, and kissed her. It wasn't a movie kiss. Not perfect. At first awkward. Teeth bumped. Ellie flinched. Sophie froze. Then everything fell into place.
slowly, carefully.
As if they were both afraid that if they kissed harder, the world would collapse. They kissed among the books, among the candles, among the smell of old paper and red wine. Ellie pressed Sophie against the shelf, her palm on her cheek, fingers trembling. Sophie wrapped her arms around Ellie's neck and felt tears, whose, it didn't matter, fall onto her sweater collar. Then they just stood, holding each other, until the candles burned out. Ellie didn't leave. She canceled the contract. Said, "Some things are more important." She rented the tiny apartment above the bookstore, with creaky floors and a view of the main street. They lived there together, read to each other,
Drank wine.
fought because Ellie was still afraid, and Sophie sometimes shut down. Made up, silently, in the dark, wrapped in the same blanket. Sometimes they came back to the shop after closing, lit the candles, sat on that same sofa. Ellie hugged Sophie from behind, rested her chin on her shoulder, and whispered, "Read to me." And Sophie read. While outside, the snow fell again. Like that first evening. Like always.